All right, so we're diving into something I think we've all thought about, self-improvement.
Yeah.
And we're looking at this podcast episode that claims you can completely transform your life in just 30 days.
Oh, wow.
Kind of sounds a little bit like those get-rich-quick schemes.
Right.
But, I mean, even if we take it with a grain of salt, who wouldn't want to be a better version of themselves just a month from now?
Yeah, well, and there's actually some science behind that 30-day time frame. Studies show that's about how long it takes to build a new habit or break an old one.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like this. You're essentially rewiring your brain.
Okay.
Training a vine to grow in a new direction.
Interesting.
Requires consistent effort, not just a one-time burst of energy.
So it's a neuroplasticity, is that what you're talking about?
Exactly.
I've heard that term before, but always in kind of a vague sense.
Right.
How does it actually work in practice, especially when we're trying to make these lasting changes?
So imagine your brain is a field of grass, and every time you walk the same path, the grass gets trampled down, creating a clear trail.
Right.
That's a habit forming.
Yeah.
Neuroplasticity means your brain can actually grow new pathways,
Mm-hmm.
but it takes conscious effort to kind of walk them repeatedly until they become the easier route.
So it's not magic, it's just focused repetition.
Exactly, and that's what makes this 30-day idea so intriguing.
Okay.
It harnesses this natural capacity of your brain to actually rewire itself. The podcast episode we're looking at breaks it down into these steps.
Okay.
And the first one being, you guessed it, setting clear goals.
Goals. So we've all heard that before.
Right.
But how do we move beyond just the vague be healthier or be happier to actually making it happen?
That's where specificity is key.
Okay.
So instead of be healthier, aim for something measurable, like drink 2 liters of water daily or, work out 3 times a week. The more concrete your goal is, the easier it is for your brain to latch onto it and actually start forming those new pathways.
So it's like giving your brain a GPS instead of just telling it to go explore.
Exactly. And writing those goals down also helps.
Yeah.
It's a visual cue that reinforces your intention every time you see it.
That makes sense. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say.
Right.
But once we've got those laser-focused goals, then the next hurdle is actually doing the thing, right?
Yeah, that's where the podcast gets into the power of what they call micro-habits.
Right, Grum habits.
Yeah. It's the idea that instead of trying to overhaul your entire life at once, you focus on tiny changes.
Okay.
Almost ridiculously small ones.
Okay, give me an example. I'm intrigued, but also a little skeptical.
Okay, let's say your goal is to read more.
All right.
The podcast suggests starting with just 5 pages a day.
5 pages?
It seems almost laughable, right?
Yeah.
But think about it, that's way less intimidating than a whole chapter.
Sure.
And you're far more likely to actually do it.
So it's about tricking your brain into thinking it's not that big of a deal, and then bam, you're reading more without even realizing it.
Exactly. It's like building momentum. Once those 5 pages become easy, you naturally want to read more.
Right.
Same goes for things like meditation. Start with just 2 minutes a day. It's about those small wins creating a snowball effect.
Interesting. It's kind of like how I started running. I used to hate it, but then I challenged myself to just run to the end of the block.
Yeah.
Now I run several miles.
You see, your brain starts associating the activity with the feeling of accomplishment, even if the initial effort is tiny.
Okay.
And that leads us to another key point from the podcast.
Right.
Tracking your progress.
Ah, yes, the accountability factor.
Right.
Whether it's a fancy app or just scribbling in a notebook, tracking can be super motivating.
It is, and it's not even about being perfect every day.
Right.
It's more about awareness.
Okay.
By tracking, you see patterns, you notice what helps you stick to a habit and what throws you off.
So for our listeners out there, it's about figuring out what works for them.
Yeah.
If they were to pick one goal from this podcast and try that 30-day transformation, how could they track it in a way that feels helpful? Not like another chore.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Some people love the visual aspect of habit tracking apps.
Right.
Others find journaling more reflective. The key is to find a system that feels easy and enjoyable to use.
Yeah.
So it becomes part of the positive feedback loop, not a source of stress.
Speaking of positive feedback loops, the podcast also talks about surrounding yourself with the right kind of energy.
Right.
Like your environment plays a huge role in whether you succeed or not.
It does. You've probably heard the saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Right.
Well, it applies to more than just people. It's about the books you read, the podcasts you listen to, the online communities you engage with.
So it's about curating your input, so to speak. Making sure the information, the voices you're letting in are aligned with the positive changes you're trying to make.
Precisely. And that brings us to another interesting point. The podcast makes the power of self-reward.
Self-reward.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive.
Really?
But rewarding yourself for those small wins actually helps solidify the new habit.
Wait, so I should give myself a little treat for drinking my 2 liters of water or reading my 5 pages?
It doesn't have to be a big thing.
Oh.
Maybe it's a 15-minute break with your favorite book after a workout.
Right.
Or allowing yourself to listen to, your favorite podcast after hitting your daily goal.
So we're talking about psychology here, right?
Yeah.
Like hacking the reward system in your brain to make those positive habits stick.
Exactly. When you reward yourself, you're essentially telling your brain, hey, this new habit feels good. Let's keep doing it.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. We've talked about the science behind habit formation. Setting clear goals, breaking them down into those micro habits, tracking progress, surrounding yourself with positivity, and even rewarding yourself.
Right.
Is there anything else this podcast recommends for making those 30 days truly transformative?
There are a couple more key points, and they might surprise you. Want to hear more?
All right, spill the beans. What other secrets to self-transformation does this podcast have up its sleeve?
Well, you know how we were talking about rewarding those small wins?
Yeah.
That actually ties into this idea of visualization, which the podcast emphasizes as like a powerful tool for change.
Visualization.
Yeah.
Is that something athletes use to improve their performance?
It is, but it's not limited to just sports. Research shows that vividly picturing yourself achieving your goals can actually increase your likelihood of success.
Really?
It's almost like giving your brain a mental rehearsal for the real thing.
So it's more than just positive thinking. There's actual science behind it.
Exactly. When you visualize yourself performing an action or achieving a goal, your brain fires similar neural pathways as if you were actually doing it.
Wow.
It's like creating a mental blueprint for success.
Interesting.
Strengthening those pathways and making them more likely to fire when you face real-life challenges.
Okay, that's fascinating. But how do we actually do visualization?
Right.
Is it just like daydreaming about our goals?
There's a bit more to it than that.
Okay.
The podcast suggests spending a few minutes each day really immersing yourself in the experience of achieving your goal. Engage all your senses.
Okay.
What you see, hear, feel, even smell or taste.
Wow.
The more vivid and realistic you make it, the more impactful it'll be.
So my goal is to write a novel.
Yeah.
I shouldn't just picture the finished book on a shelf.
Right.
I should imagine myself typing away, feeling the satisfaction of completing a chapter. Maybe even smelling the coffee I'm drinking while I write.
Exactly. It's about creating that full sensory experience in your mind, which further reinforces those neural pathways we talked about earlier.
This is starting to sound like a superpower. Can visualization really help with any goal, though?
The podcast certainly suggests that it can be applied broadly. Whether you're aiming to run a marathon or give a presentation or even have a difficult conversation, visualization can boost your confidence and motivation, making you more likely to actually take the necessary steps.
I'm definitely going to have to try this.
Yeah.
It seems like a simple yet powerful tool to add to the self-improvement arsenal.
Absolutely. And while we're on the topic of seemingly simple yet powerful tools, the podcast also highlights something that might surprise you.
Oh, I'm all ears.
It's the power of gratitude.
Gratitude.
Yeah. No, you might think gratitude is just a nice feeling.
Right.
But research suggests it can actually rewire our brains for positivity.
Wait, so simply being thankful can change our brains. How does that work?
Studies show that practicing gratitude regularly can lead to structural changes in the brain, specifically in areas associated with happiness reward and stress reduction. It's like gratitude is a workout for your brain strengthening those positive pathways.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we make gratitude a regular practice? Does the podcast give any specific advice?
It suggests keeping a gratitude journal where you write down 3 things you're grateful for each day.
3 things?
Yeah. They can be big or small, from a sunny day to a kind gesture to simply having food on your table.
So it's about actively shifting our focus to the positive, even when things might feel challenging.
Exactly. And another powerful practice the podcast recommends is expressing gratitude to others.
Okay.
Whether it's a sincere thank you to a coworker or a heartfelt letter to a friend.
Right.
Expressing gratitude not only strengthens our relationships, but it also boosts our own happiness.
So it's like this beautiful cycle. Gratitude makes us happier, and happier people are more likely to express gratitude, which further reinforces those positive feelings.
Precisely. And the podcast even suggests weaving gratitude into our daily routines. For example, while you're brushing your teeth, think of 3 things you're grateful for. Or during your commute, take a moment to appreciate the sights and sounds around you.
So it's about making gratitude a habit, not just a once-in-a-while feeling.
Exactly. And by integrating these practices, goal-setting micro-habits, tracking positive environments, self-reward, visualization, and gratitude.
Wow.
The podcast argues that you can create a truly transformative 30-day experience.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground. This podcast is jam-packed with actionable advice.
It is, and if we connect all these pieces, what emerges is a framework for not just change, but for a more fulfilling and joyful life.
It's inspiring to think that even small, consistent efforts can lead to such significant shifts.
Absolutely. It's about those daily choices, those micro habits that ultimately shape our lives. And speaking of small efforts leading to big changes, there's one more intriguing concept the podcast touches on that I think our listeners will find fascinating.
Oh, do tell. What is it? Okay, lay it on me. What is it? What's this mind-blowing concept?
It's about the power of saying no.
Saying no.
Yeah, not in a negative or resistant way, but as a way to protect your energy and focus on what truly matters, in your self-improvement journey.
That's interesting. We've talked about adding so many things, new habits, gratitude practices, visualization.
Right.
But we haven't really addressed what we might need to let go of to make space for all this growth.
Exactly. The podcast argues that saying no to certain commitments, distractions, or even thought patterns can be just as crucial as saying yes to the positive changes we're seeking.
So it's like decluttering, but for our time, energy, and mental space.
Precisely. It's about becoming more discerning with what we allow into our lives. So we can fully dedicate ourselves to goals and habits that align with, our desired transformation.
I'm starting to see the wisdom in this. But saying no can be hard.
Yeah.
Any tips on how to do it gracefully and effectively?
The podcast suggests starting with a simple exercise. Identify your non-negotiables.
Non-negotiable.
Yeah, these are the things that are truly important to you. The values and goals that you absolutely won't compromise on.
So, for example, if someone's non-negotiables are family time and creative expression, they might say no to extra work commitments that infringe on those areas.
Exactly. And once you've identified your non-negotiables, it becomes easier to assess opportunities and requests through that lens. Does this align with my core values and goals? If not, a polite but firm no might be the best response.
This reminds me of something I read recently about decision fatigue. The more decisions we make throughout the day, even small ones, the more depleted our willpower becomes. So by consciously saying no to things that don't align with our goals, we're actually conserving energy for the things that truly matter.
That's a great point. And the podcast also emphasizes the importance of being mindful of the internal chatter.
Internal chatter?
Yeah.
You mean those negative thoughts that creep in and tell us we can't do it or we're not good enough?
Exactly. The podcast suggests that we can also say no to those thoughts. Not by suppressing them, but by acknowledging them without judgment, and then gently redirecting our focus back to our goals and, positive affirmations.
So it's about becoming aware of those negative thought patterns and choosing not to give them power over us.
Exactly. And by incorporating this idea of consciously saying no into our 30-day journey, we create a more focused and empowered experience.
I love that it's not just about adding new things. But also about subtracting the things that drain our energy and hold us back.
Precisely. And by combining all these elements, the goal setting, the micro habits, the tracking the positive environment, the self-reward, the visualization, the gratitude, and the conscious, the podcast suggests that we can create a truly remarkable shift in our lives in just 30 days.
Wow. This deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from a simple 30-day challenge to like a comprehensive framework for self-transformation.
It's amazing how much wisdom and actionable advice can be packed into a single podcast episode, isn't it?
It really is. And I think what resonates most with me is the emphasis on small, consistent actions leading to big changes. It's empowering to realize that we don't need to make these drastic overnight transformations to see incredible results.
Absolutely. It's about those daily choices, those micro habits that ultimately shape our lives.
Well, and on that note, I think that's our deep dive for today. But, I'd love for our listeners to consider what is one thing they can say yes to today that aligns with their vision for a better them, and what is one thing they can say no to that might be holding them back.
That's a great question.
Even small shifts in those areas can set you on a path toward incredible growth. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep believing in your power to create the life you truly desire.